My name is Ava, and I'm 22 years old. You might be wondering how a girl my age ends up living with her uncle, especially given the circumstances I'm about to share. Honestly, I never imagined this would happen either. But life has a way of throwing unexpected turns, and sometimes, we have no choice but to navigate them. I'm studying graphic design, and most of my time is spent drawing, designing, and doing freelance work. It's been a long road to get here, though. Life hasn't always been kind. My parents divorced when I was younger, and ever since then, I've been moving from one place to another, trying to find a sense of stability that always seemed out of reach. At first, it felt like I was always in transition, never really settling down, always in between homes and lives. I thought that once I was older, things would fall into place, but it wasn't that simple. After years of searching for something solid, I ended up staying with my uncle Nathan. It wasn't part of the plan, but sometimes, life doesn't ask for our approval. Nathan's been there for me in ways that go beyond what a typical uncle would do. He's not just family, he's been a mentor to me since I was a child. I remember him teaching me how to ride a bike, fixing things around the house when something broke, and even buying me my first car when I turned 18. He always had this way of making things seem possible, of making me believe that I could handle anything life threw at me. So when my mom had to go away for work, and I needed somewhere to stay while finishing college, Nathan was the obvious choice. He's thoughtful, patient, and incredibly kind. He and his wife, Victoria, live in a beautiful house out in the countryside, far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. It seemed like the perfect place for a temporary move, quiet, peaceful, and serene. I thought it would be just another short-lived chapter in my life, a brief pause before I found something permanent. But as time went on, I realized that my life here, in Nathan and Victoria's home, wasn't going to be as simple as I'd imagined. It was months before I began to truly settle in. At first, everything felt new and strange, different from the fast-paced life I was used to. The countryside was quieter than I'd ever imagined, and the stillness made me feel both calm and unsettled at the same time. But I adapted. I got used to the routines of the house, the peaceful rhythm of the countryside, and the calmness of living away from the chaos I had known. Or so I thought. But then, one day, something happened that changed everything. It was an ordinary morning. I woke up early, like I always did, and decided to go for a walk. The air was crisp, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, casting a soft glow on the landscape. It was one of those mornings where everything felt like it was perfectly in place. But as I walked back to the house, I noticed something that threw me off. Nathan's door was slightly ajar. I hadn't expected to see anything unusual, but for some reason, I walked over and pushed it open. The sight that greeted me was far from what I had anticipated. Nathan was still asleep, lying on his bed, his breathing slow and steady. But there was something in that moment, a feeling, a shift that I couldn't quite put into words. I stood there for a moment, frozen in time, my heart racing in a way that I couldn't explain. I had always admired Nathan for his wisdom, his kindness, and his gentle nature. But in that moment, something about him felt different. Maybe it was the vulnerability of the situation, seeing him so peaceful and unaware. Or maybe it was the weight of everything I had been carrying, the years of moving, of searching for home, of never truly feeling settled. I turned away, not wanting to intrude further, but the image of him lying there stayed with me. It was a strange sensation, one that I hadn't expected to feel for someone I had always looked up to, someone who had always been there for me. But this was more than just a moment of confusion. It was a realization. Something had changed. And I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it would stay with me, gnawing at the edges of my mind. This story is far from over. In fact, it's only just beginning. There's so much more to uncover, so many layers to peel back. And I need to tell you everything, because this isn't just about me and my uncle anymore. It's about understanding what it means to find a place where you belong, and the surprising places where we often find ourselves. So please, keep reading. Stay with me as I uncover the complexities of my life here with Nathan and Victoria. Because the more I uncover, the more I realize that nothing is ever quite as simple as it seems, and sometimes, the most unexpected changes come when we least expect them. When I moved in with Nathan and his wife, Victoria, I wasn't entirely sure what to expect. Victoria had been part of the family for a couple of years by then. She and Nathan had gotten married just 2 years before I arrived, and at first, I struggled to find my place in their home. She was older than Nathan and carried herself with a kind of poise and quiet authority that made me feel like a guest in someone else's story. I stayed in the guest room, tucked away at the far end of the house, doing my best not to disturb their rhythm. I was polite, careful, always trying not to take up too much space. In those early weeks, the silence between Victoria and me felt almost like a wall, as if we were cautiously circling one another, unsure of how, or whether, to connect. But with time, the tension began to ease. Victoria would occasionally offer advice about cooking, or show me how she liked the house kept. She wasn't unkind, just reserved, maybe a little protective of her world. While we never grew particularly close, the awkwardness faded into something more manageable. We weren't friends, but we coexisted with mutual respect. I thought things were finally settling down. That I could focus on school, my art, and perhaps even find peace in this unexpected arrangement. But something else began to stir, quietly at first, like a breeze that grows into a storm before you even realize the wind has picked up. The more time I spent with Nathan, the more I felt drawn to him, not in a romantic way, but in an emotional, confusing way I couldn't quite put into words. It was something in his presence, in the way he carried himself. His quiet strength, the way he listened when I talked, how he remembered small details about my work or my day. He smiled differently at me when I was excited about a project, and when he gently patted my shoulder in encouragement, I felt it linger, not on my skin, but somewhere deeper, somewhere unguarded. And I hated how much it affected me. I told myself over and over that it was nothing. That it was just gratitude, or admiration, or the need for a father figure after so many years without one. But there were moments, when I'd catch him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, when the air between us felt too heavy. Too alive. It scared me, this pull. I didn't want it. I didn't understand it. And I didn't trust it. One evening, after dinner, I was in my room working on a freelance project. The house was quiet. Nathan had gone to his room to take a nap hours ago, and Victoria had left to meet friends in town. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. I heard footsteps in the hallway. At first, I thought it might be Victoria returning early. But the steps were slow, deliberate. Then I heard the soft creak of Nathan's bedroom door opening. I paused, my fingers frozen over my tablet. My instincts told me to stay put, but something else pulled me toward the hallway. I stood up and made my way quietly to his room. The door was partially open. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of why I was even there. I wasn't trying to pry or snoop. I just wanted to check on him. Nathan was lying on his bed, one arm tucked behind his head. The afternoon light filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows across his face. He looked peaceful, removed from the worries of the world, almost like he belonged to a painting. There was something comforting about the sight, like watching the ocean breathe or a candle flicker in the dark. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, trying to make sense of the swirl of emotions in my chest, confusion, guilt, longing for stability, fear of loneliness, and something else I didn't have a name for. My heart raced. I could feel it thudding against my ribs, loud enough that I wondered if he might hear it and wake up. But it wasn't about attraction. It was about connection. After years of bouncing between homes, after a lifetime of fractured family ties and uncertain foundations, I had finally found someone who made me feel safe. And that terrified me, because I didn't know what I would do if that feeling ever disappeared. I wanted to turn away, to go back to my room and bury myself in work, to pretend I never wandered down the hallway in the first place. But my thoughts were interrupted by a sound, his voice. "Ava," he murmured, groggy, not fully awake. I froze. "Is everything okay?" he asked, lifting his head slightly to look at me, his eyes still clouded with sleep. I nodded quickly. "Yeah. I thought I heard something." He sat up a little, concerned. "Are you all right?" His voice was soft, full of that familiar warmth. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if I was all right. I wasn't sure about anything anymore. "I'm fine," I whispered, stepping back into the hallway. "Sorry. I didn't mean to wake you." He smiled gently, that same calm smile he'd always had. "No need to apologize. Get some rest, okay?" I nodded again and turned away, walking slowly back to my room. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind turning over thoughts I couldn't organize, feelings I didn't ask for, and a longing that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with the need to belong. Because that's what this story is really about. It's not about confusion or fleeting emotions. It's about what happens when someone, who has been lost for years, finally finds a light in the dark, and then wonders if it's safe to trust it. And maybe, just maybe, this isn't just my story. Maybe it's a story about healing. About discovering who we are in the quiet moments, and learning how to stand still long enough to let our hearts catch up to our past. There's more. So much more. But for now, I'll leave it here, at this crossroad of memory and meaning, where the past and present quietly collide. I didn't mean to knock over the vase, it was just an accident. But the sound of it hitting the floor shattered the silence in Nathan's room like glass. He stirred beneath the blankets, his eyes fluttering open, and for a moment, we locked eyes. There was confusion in his gaze, that much was clear. But there was something else, too, something harder to name. A question, maybe. A quiet storm of thoughts behind the tired expression. He blinked slowly, trying to focus on me, then let out a groggy chuckle. "Ava? What are you doing here?" His voice was thick with sleep, warm and calm like it always was, but even that felt different tonight. I froze. My heart was racing, my mouth had gone completely dry. I opened it to speak, but nothing coherent came out at first. I didn't want to seem like I was snooping, but how could I explain what I was doing there? I didn't even know myself. I didn't mean to wake you," I stammered, cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I just heard something, and I—" Nathan sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. He smiled at me, his usual, patient smile, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes tonight that made something flutter in my chest. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking again. "It's okay," he said gently. "You know you can always talk to me, Ava. I'm here for you." I nodded, trying to anchor myself in his words, but my mind was spinning in every direction. My emotions felt like waves crashing over one another. I couldn't even name what I was feeling, just that it was big, and overwhelming, and unfamiliar. "I just wanted to talk," I whispered. My voice barely made it past my lips. His smile faded, just slightly. Something flickered in his eyes, a pause, a hesitation, but it disappeared as quickly as it had come. He patted the space beside him on the bed. "Come here," he said warmly. "Then let's talk." I hesitated. My feet were rooted to the ground. But something inside me, a deep need for comfort, for clarity, for connection, pulled me forward. I sat down beside him, slowly, cautiously. The bed dipped slightly beneath my weight, and for a moment, all I could hear was the soft rhythm of his breathing. The room felt heavier than before, full of silence that wasn't empty, but expectant. I could smell the faint scent of his cologne, feel the quiet hum of presence between us. I kept my eyes down for a moment, afraid of what I might see if I looked up. But eventually, I did. His face was close, closer than I'd realized. His gaze was gentle, unsure, but steady. And for a moment, I saw something in him that matched the uncertainty in myself. Not desire or intent, but emotion. A deep, unresolved tenderness. "Ava," he asked quietly, "are you okay?" I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out at first. I wasn't okay. Not because of him, but because everything in my life felt like it was coming undone and being reassembled at once. Because I'd been carrying too much for too long, and didn't know how to set it down. Because, after all this time, I just wanted someone to see me, and stay. "I don't know," I said finally, voice cracking under the weight of honesty. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he placed a hand gently over mine. Not inappropriately, just steadying, like an anchor in a storm. "Whatever it is," he said, "you don't have to go through it alone. You're safe here, Ava. You're not a burden. You matter." Tears welled up in my eyes. I hadn't cried in so long, not really. Not in a way that felt healing. But in that moment, it was as if the walls I'd been building for years began to crack, letting the light in through the broken parts. And I let myself cry, not because I was weak, but because I was finally in a place where I didn't have to be strong every second. Nathan didn't rush me. He didn't ask for details. He just stayed there, present, patient, like he always had. His kindness wasn't new, but for the first time, I allowed myself to receive it. And in doing so, I began to understand that sometimes, the most powerful moments in our lives come quietly, without spectacle, without answers, just quiet truths between two people who care. Maybe this wasn't about confusion or complexity after all. Maybe it was about healing. About allowing myself to be vulnerable. About realizing that family isn't perfect, but sometimes it's exactly what we need. And so, I stayed there for a while, my hand in his, breathing through the silence, letting the weight of the past slowly lift. Because maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something real, not dramatic or explosive, but honest. A moment of stillness in a life that had never known peace. The air felt thick, as though something heavy and invisible had settled in the room. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was profound. Charged, even. Not with anything romantic, but with a sense that something long unspoken was finally surfacing. Nathan didn't speak at first. He looked at me with an intensity one wasn't used to, not the kind born of affection, but one shaped by deep concern. His brows furrowed slightly as though he were trying to read beyond my words, past my composure, and into the parts of me I kept hidden. "Ava," he said gently, "what's really going on?" His voice anchored me. It was calm, but firm in its care. That single question cracked something open in me. All the stress, all the weight I'd been carrying, my mother's absence, the constant moving, the isolation I felt even in places meant to feel like home, all of it swelled inside me. "I don't know how to explain it," I said, my voice trembling. "I just feel lost. Like I don't belong anywhere." Nathan didn't rush to fill the silence that followed. He let it breathe. He looked at me with a kind of patience that felt foreign, but healing. Then he did something simple, yet powerful. He reached out and held my hand. "I've felt that way too," he said. "After your dad left, and your mom tried to keep everything together. I know how much pressure that put on you." My eyes welled up again, this time not from shame or confusion, but from the relief of being seen. I always thought if I kept going, if I worked hard, stayed out of the way, made myself useful, maybe then I'd earn peace, I whispered. Nathan squeezed my hand gently. You don't have to earn peace, Ava. You deserve it just by being who you are. His words struck something deep. For years, I had measured my worth in productivity, in how little trouble I could cause, in how much I could carry without asking for help. And here was someone finally telling me I didn't have to do that anymore. I guess I didn't come into your room tonight just because I was lost, I admitted. Maybe I just needed someone to remind me that I'm not alone. You never were, he said. You've always had a place here. With me and Victoria. I know we are all figuring things out, but that doesn't mean you're unwanted. I looked up, finally letting myself believe it. For the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel like a burden. We stayed like that for a while, no more words, just quiet understanding. The confusion I had felt earlier faded, replaced by something steady and real. It wasn't intensity or adrenaline that held us together in that moment, it was family. Honest, messy, imperfect, but real. When I finally stood to leave, I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because I knew I didn't have to carry it alone anymore. As I reached the door, Nathan called out softly, Ava. Yeah? I'm proud of you. For everything. Even when it's hard to talk about. I nodded, feeling the warmth of those words settle into me. Thanks, I said. I needed to hear that more than I realized. Nathan's presence had always been calming. His steadiness gave me something I hadn't realized I was searching for, stability, even a sense of home. But in that moment, as the silence stretched between us, I realized I had mistaken the warmth of being seen and heard for something else. I had been lonely, lost in a cycle of unresolved pain, and that pain had twisted my perceptions. I stepped back. The realization hit me like a wave. I wasn't looking for love in the way I thought. I was desperate for belonging, for safety, for the feeling of being cherished by someone I trusted. And Nathan, my uncle, had been that lighthouse in the storm. But even lighthouses have boundaries. I think I need to get some air, I said softly, my voice shaking not with fear, but with self-awareness. Nathan nodded gently, his brow furrowed in concern, but he didn't ask questions. Take your time, he said quietly. I'm here if you need to talk. I stepped out of the room and walked out to the porch. The night air was cool and grounding. The stars stretched across the sky like scattered memories, some bright and clear, others distant and buried. I wrapped my arms around myself, not out of cold, but to hold myself together. That moment was a turning point. Not because of what almost happened, but because of what didn't. Because I finally understood something deeper. Emotional pain, when left unspoken, doesn't just fade, it warps. And I had been living in the shadows of old wounds for far too long. The next day, I sat down with Victoria. It wasn't easy. She and I had never been close. There had always been a quiet wall between us, one neither of us knew how to scale. But I had to try. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about building something honest, even if it meant tearing down parts of myself I had hidden away. I haven't been okay, I told her. And I think I've been holding a lot inside for too long. About my parents. About feeling unwanted. About not knowing who I am anymore. Victoria surprised me. She didn't scold or raise an eyebrow. She simply listened. For the first time, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't noticed before, empathy. And maybe her own tiredness. We all carry things, Ava, she said. Some heavier than others. But you don't have to carry yours alone. That night, I wrote in my sketchbook for the first time in weeks. Not for a class or a client, but for myself. I poured everything into it, my confusion, my heartbreak, my longing for a place where I could finally be whole. Day by day, things changed. Nathan became less of a figure I leaned on emotionally and more of a guide, someone I could learn from, not depend on for validation. He encouraged me to apply for an art residency in the city, and for the first time, I considered a future outside the walls of that house. Victoria and I slowly began to understand each other. She shared stories of her own upbringing, her own losses. And through our shared vulnerabilities, a bridge began to form. Not perfect, but real. Eventually, I moved out. Not because I was running away, but because I was ready to start again. To find out who I was when I wasn't defined by other people's needs or my own wounds. In the city, surrounded by new faces and unfamiliar streets, I began to breathe differently. Freer. Bolder. More myself. Sometimes I still visit Nathan and Victoria. We laugh over dinner. We talk about art, about life. And sometimes, when the sun is setting and the sky turns gold, I sit on the same porch where I once felt lost, and realize how far I've come. This wasn't a story about forbidden love. It was a story about grief, misinterpretation, recovery, and choosing to grow instead of collapse. It was about learning that what we need is not always what we think we want, and that the hardest truths often lead to the most beautiful transformations. And I'm still growing. Still healing. But now, I know who I am. Victoria stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of surprise and concern. The weight of the moment settled around us like a thick fog. I stepped back instinctively, my chest tight with panic. Not because of guilt, but because of the sudden clarity hitting me all at once. Victoria, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I was just talking to Nathan. I didn't mean to overstay. She looked at both of us, searching for something in our faces. Nathan cleared his throat, finally standing. She wasn't feeling well, he said, his voice steady. She needed someone to talk to. That's all. The air was still. Then Victoria nodded slowly, the crease in her brow softening. All right, she said gently. Ava, can I talk to you for a moment? My stomach dropped, but I nodded and followed her down the hallway to the kitchen. The soft glow of the lights flickered across the marble counter, as she poured 2 glasses of water, offering me one. I could feel her gaze on me. Concerned, not accusing. I've noticed something, she said after a long pause. And I want to say this with care. You've been hurting for a long time. I see it. You try to hide it in your art, your routines. But it's there. Her words broke something open inside me. I blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. I never really healed, I admitted. After my parents' divorce, everything just felt broken. I kept looking for someone to fix me. Someone to hold on to. Victoria nodded, her eyes softening. And Nathan, he's been there for you, yes. But Ava, the love you're seeking, it has to begin within you. No one else can give you what you haven't yet found in yourself. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up, sketching furiously in my notebook. Memories, emotions, confessions poured from my fingers like a river long dammed. And in that release, I started to see the truth. What I had mistaken for something romantic was actually a longing for connection, safety, validation. Things I had never learned to give myself. Over the next few weeks, I kept my distance, not coldly, but consciously. I took walks alone. I visited art galleries. I signed up for a group therapy session at school. And slowly, I began to rebuild. Nathan noticed, of course. One afternoon, as I was heading out to meet a professor, he caught me by the porch. I'm proud of you, he said. You're finding your own way. I'm trying, I replied. And I'm grateful for everything you've done. We didn't talk about that night again. We didn't need to. It had happened, and it had taught us both something. About boundaries. About vulnerability. About what it means to love someone enough not to cross a line. A month later, I found an opportunity for a summer design internship in the city. I applied and was accepted. When I told Victoria, she hugged me tighter than I expected. "You're going to be amazing," she said, smiling. "Go find your story." And I did. The city was loud, messy, and breathtaking. I lived in a tiny studio with cracked windows, but it was mine. I worked late, drank too much coffee, and sketched in every notebook I owned. I met people who inspired me, challenged me, reminded me that I was still growing. And that was okay. Some nights, I still think about that quiet house in the countryside. The pain I walked into. The clarity I walked out with. This isn't a story about forbidden feelings. It's a story about misplaced longing, and how we sometimes confuse comfort for love, attention for affection, and safety for intimacy. But it's also a story of resilience. Of finding strength in the most unexpected places. Of learning to be whole on your own. I'm Ava. I'm 22. And for the first time, I'm building a life that belongs entirely to me. Victoria's voice was low, uncertain, but laced with something stronger, an intuition that told her something wasn't right. "Ava," she said again, stepping into the room fully now. Her eyes swept between us, me standing awkwardly near the bed, and Nathan sitting stiffly, rubbing the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "What's going on here?" The question hung in the air like thunder before a storm. My heart sank. I could feel the blood drain from my face. In that instant, every inch of warmth from before vanished, replaced by the cold sting of clarity. What had just happened, whatever it was, felt wrong. Not just in the eyes of others, but in the deepest, truest part of myself. I stammered. The words wouldn't come. They couldn't. Nathan didn't speak either. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the floor as though searching for an answer that didn't exist. His silence echoed louder than any words could have. The tension in the room was suffocating. But what happened next wasn't what I expected. Victoria's face didn't twist with rage. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. Instead, her expression softened, melted into something that looked almost like sorrow. Her gaze lingered on both of us, heavy with unspoken weight, and then she did something that caught me completely off guard. She closed the door gently behind her and walked to the center of the room. "Ava," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there are things you don't know, things neither of you fully understand." I looked at her, confused. Her words were gentle but carried weight. "What do you mean?" She sighed, folding her arms across her chest, as if protecting herself from the memories that stirred inside her. "Nathan has always been a protector," she said. "He's the kind of person who absorbs the pain of others. That's part of why I fell in love with him. But sometimes, that need to protect turns into something else. Something confusing. Especially for people who are hurting." I felt her words cut through me, not like a knife, but like a truth I had been too afraid to name. She turned to me fully now, eyes kind but unwavering. "You're grieving, Ava. Maybe not in the traditional sense. But you've lost so much. Your home. Your sense of family. Your trust. And sometimes, when you're searching for something solid to hold on to, you reach for the closest thing. Even if it's not right." Tears stung my eyes. "I didn't mean to," I started, but she shook her head gently. "I'm not here to shame you," she said softly. "But I am here to ask you to think. To feel. To really look at yourself and ask what it is you're searching for." Her words lingered long after she left the room. Nathan sat in silence, his hands still clasped tightly. I watched him, unsure what to say. We had crossed an invisible line, not through intention, but through pain. Through loneliness. And through a longing neither of us fully understood. I think we lost our way, I whispered. Nathan nodded slowly. Yeah, we did. We didn't talk much after that. Not because there was anger, but because there was understanding. A quiet, heavy understanding that sometimes the most meaningful thing two people can do is step back. That night, I packed a small bag and left a note on the kitchen table. It wasn't a dramatic exit, it was a quiet choice. A step toward clarity. Months later, I moved in with a friend near campus and picked up a part-time job at a local bookstore. I started seeing a therapist. I poured myself into art, journaling, and long walks through the city. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to build something I hadn't known I needed. A version of myself that felt whole, not because someone else filled the cracks, but because I was learning to do that on my own. Victoria sent me a letter one afternoon. She wrote, "Healing takes courage, Ava. And love doesn't always come in the form we expect. Sometimes, love is knowing when to let go. I'm proud of you for choosing to begin again." Nathan never tried to reach out. I think he understood. Maybe that was his way of loving too, letting things be, and wishing me well from a distance. Now, looking back, I don't hate that chapter of my life. It was confusing. It was flawed. But it was real. And it taught me one of the most important lessons I'll ever carry. The deepest connection you'll ever find is the one you build with yourself. I'm Ava. I'm no longer defined by pain or confusion. I'm a survivor, an artist, and a woman who chose to grow. And that is more than enough. Nathan sat silently, the room still heavy with everything that hadn't been said. He looked like a man carrying too much, the weight of guilt, the confusion of emotion, and the tangled bond that had formed between us. And I felt it too. The space between us wasn't just physical, it was thick with questions, with unspoken fears, and with the need for answers we didn't yet have. The more I thought about it, the more I realized, none of this had been part of anyone's plan. Life had unraveled in ways none of us could predict. There was no map for what we were feeling, no simple way forward. It had just happened. But Victoria had been right. We couldn't just ignore it. The confusion, the closeness, the blurred lines, we had to face all of it. Head on. Not in shame. Not in silence. But with truth. I stepped closer, hesitant but certain. "Nathan," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly, "what do we do now?" His eyes lifted to meet mine, and in them I saw a storm. Regret, tenderness, sorrow, and something deeper, something harder to name. "I don't know, Ava," he said quietly. "I don't know what to feel or what to think. I don't know if I should be angry, ashamed, or if I'm even allowed to feel anything at all." His voice cracked slightly, betraying just how torn he was. I could see the pull in him, the weight of what we'd shared battling with his loyalty to Victoria, the woman he had chosen, the woman who had just seen enough to ask questions neither of us could answer. And I understood. Because I felt it too. This wasn't something that could be resolved with a single conversation. It wasn't black or white. There was too much grey. Too much history. Too much pain and longing wrapped up in the moment we had shared. I took a breath, deep and steady, and walked toward him. I wanted to reach for him. I wanted to comfort him. But I didn't know if that was right anymore. I didn't know what right looked like in this story. Still, I knelt beside him, keeping just enough distance, and said softly, "I don't think we are going to figure this all out tonight. But I think we need to talk. Really talk. Because if we keep pretending, if we keep hiding, we'll never heal. Not you. Not me. Not Victoria." He nodded slowly, his jaw tight, but his eyes softened. "Yeah. I know. I don't know where to start. I reached out, gently taking his hand. It was a small touch, but in it was everything we couldn't yet say. The connection still pulsed between us, but this time it wasn't about confusion or longing. It was about truth. We start, I said, by being honest. About what happened. About what we felt. And what we still feel. And then, we figure out what comes next, together, but maybe not together the way we thought. He looked down at our hands, his thumb brushing over mine, not in affection, but in thought. It's not going to be easy, he murmured. But I want to understand. I want to do what's right. I nodded. Me too. We sat there for a long time. In the silence. In the uncertainty. In the fragile beginning of something new, not romance, not escape, but truth. I didn't know what the next days or weeks would bring. I didn't know how Victoria would process this, or if she'd ever forgive us. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to run anymore. I would face whatever came next. With honesty. With courage. And with the hope that even broken things, if faced with love and care, could still be made whole. We sat in silence for what felt like forever, the air around us thick with the gravity of everything unspoken. Our breaths were quiet but uneven, as though each of us was trying to hold the pieces of ourselves together. The room, once filled with confusion and impulsive emotion, had grown still, like the moment after a storm, when all that remains is the sound of your heartbeat and the weight of the debris left behind. There were no clear answers. No simple way to explain what had happened, or how it had come to this. The emotions we were feeling weren't neat. They weren't labeled or logical. They were overwhelming, tangled, and real. And yet, through that mess, Victoria's words lingered like a lifeline. She hadn't turned away. She hadn't lashed out. Instead, she had offered something we didn't deserve but desperately needed, grace. A space to feel. A space to face what had happened. A space to move forward. I looked at Nathan again, truly looked at him. His eyes were tired, his shoulders hunched with a quiet heaviness, but there was something new there too, clarity. Not of knowing what to do, but of understanding that pretending nothing happened wasn't an option anymore. There was no perfect solution. No miracle that could erase the confusion or guilt. But there was something else now, honesty. Maybe that was where healing could begin. I leaned back slightly, folding my hands together in my lap, letting the quiet speak for us for a while. My thoughts were spinning, what this meant, how it would affect everything moving forward, whether there was a way to repair what had been strained, or maybe even build something entirely new from the rubble. But my mind kept drifting back to Victoria. Her calm eyes. Her steady voice. Her surprising grace. She hadn't walked in and destroyed us with words. She hadn't accused or punished. Instead, she had seen us. Flawed. Conflicted. Lost. And somehow, she had still given us space. She had left the door open, not wide, but enough to say, I see you. I don't understand it yet. But I'm willing to try. That moment shifted everything inside me. I felt the beginnings of hope. Not the kind that promises things will go back to how they were, but the kind that says maybe, just maybe, we can find a way forward. And yet, questions remained. Could we admit the depth of what we'd felt without losing everything? Could we untangle ourselves from the guilt and confusion without tearing each other apart? Could we even face Victoria again, with open hearts and trembling truths? Those questions hovered like clouds on the edge of my mind. But they were for another time. Another conversation. Another reckoning. Right now, it was just Nathan and me, two people sitting in the silence of our shared uncertainty. Two people who had made mistakes. Who had crossed a line. but who were finally ready to face it, not with fear, but with the courage to be honest. We both knew nothing would ever be the same again. We couldn't go back. But maybe we could go forward. Not perfectly. Not easily. But with honesty. With care. With the quiet, stubborn hope that even the most broken moments can lead to something more meaningful, if we let them. Nathan shifted beside me, his voice low and fragile. Do you think we can fix this? I looked at him, my heart still tender. I don't know, I answered. But I think we can try. And maybe that's enough for now. And in the silence that followed, I believed it. Even if the road ahead was unclear, we would take the next step. Together.